In the unexplored region of northern South Korea, many people are gathered by masked individuals, and naturally, some of them begin to feel a bit pressured, like a certain boy faced with this. An older man asks if it is the boy's first time on an expedition, then with a smile while accepting a mug. The boy explains that he had already gone into portals and dungeons, but never to an unexplored region. In this case, old man comments that it is better to prepare mentally, since these places remain unexplored for centuries, being great for monsters besides that. Many of them are ancient, but since the expedition leader is from the Marshall Lee clan and brother of the patriarch, the boy believes it will be fine. However, when speaking of him, the old man explains that he is an illegitimate son, weak enough to be banished from the clan. This was Lee Cheel. He is described as someone without talent and without endurance, and being only at the 7th rank. They will not be able to rely on him. Furthermore, it becomes clear how he is treated when one of the guards orders the leader to keep moving, and he simply accepts it without any indignation toward the rudeness. The Dark Sword Squad and the squad directly affiliated with the patriarch were supposedly meant to be protecting them. What is possible to sense that something is wrong? And the boy does not have a good feeling about this mission. A long time ago, there was a time when this illegitimate son also had dreams and hopes. The first time, he bore the weight of being part of the esteemed Lee clan. He was still a child. And when he was chosen by the best weapon in the seal selection ritual, his expectations were very high. Obviously, Chu thought that if he continued gaining recognition and tried his hardest one day, he could become famous among everyone. However, that did not happen because of an unfortunate diagnosis from a doctor about his mana pathways. It was said to the boy that they were not suitable for learning magic and lacked the stability to practice martial arts. Therefore, for the young master to reach the 9th rank would be a miracle, and naturally the news reached the high-ranking members of the clan. When everyone learned about his condition, they said that what happened during the selection ritual was mere coincidence. Even so, the boy did not stop giving his best and reached the 7th rank by the age of 25, feeling happy despite the superiority of his brothers. Unfortunately, happiness did not last long, as Chu was expelled later at the age of 30. And if it were not for his older brother, he could have left home as a corpse. Since then, this legitimate son has been running from everything for 10 years, and times of chaos fell upon the population. Gradually, the news spread from the richest to the poorest, as the unexplored regions expanded, and monster invasions became frequent. One day, one of these newspapers flew into the protagonist's face, and upon taking a look at its content, he realized something terrifying. His father, known as the pinnacle of martial arts and patriarch of the esteemed Marshall Lee clan, had died thus. On that very day, the Dark Sword Squad appeared once again before young Master Chill. Immediately, the protagonist asked how they had found him, but they only handed him a decree, which left him a bit disappointed as they ignored his question anyway. He knew that this cursed lineage did not intend to free him, but he did not expect that the third brother, Lee Gung-song, had become patriarch instead of the eldest brother. And worse than that, was the squad informing him that they would be back in an hour, in this case, somewhat hurried. The protagonist asked what happened to the eldest brother, but once again I did not answer. If the boy was going to refuse to follow orders, and knowing that doing something like that without a good reason would result in death, the protagonist accepted the mission. Yet the moment they left, he could not help but feel furious about it. To the mission site until that boy from before stops, surprised by something along the way. In front of everyone was an abandoned building that, for some reason, remained well preserved in this case. One of the soldiers from the Shadow Squad warns that they're going to enter, and just as they step inside, things are worse than expected, because inside the building is possible to see the skeletons of many people and of a giant ancient monster. Mysteriously, one of the soldiers announces that he has found it and orders his colleagues to begin. And without any mercy or explanation, the boy from before is exterminated with just one strike, in front of the protagonist and the old man who helped him. Obviously, the elder shouts, questioning what they are doing, and Chill also cannot understand. However, the squad member claims that they already knew, they would be eliminated from the beginning. And because of that, he shouts that the citizens should feel honored to be used by the clan. However, before another fatality could occur, the protagonist intervened, stabbing the assassin from behind. But to his misfortune, the soldier revealed that the sovereign was behind this, and that they were ordered to bring everyone there, to exterminate both in the cleanest way possible. That he jokes saying he can only do that if they don't resist. And unexpectedly his wound begins to close. Knowing his situation, one of the adventurers tries to attack from behind, but is split in half with a single strike. With that, the soldier mocks the protagonist's strength and prepares to finish him off. For someone of the blood of the Marshall Lee clan, Shill is quickly overwhelmed by the warrior. And suddenly a huge explosion occurs, generating an intense light in the sky. And with that, the protagonist feels all the effects of being fatally attacked, but remains determined not to be defeated so easily. Naturally, the first thing he thinks is that he needs a weapon, and luckily, he finds one on the skeleton of the monster. Since it was a sword powerful enough to kill a great monster, it should still be good even if abandoned. So praying for it to work, the boy grabbed the sword's hilt. But suddenly the blade began to crumble into black dust, and with it disintegrating in front of him. Chill couldn't understand why. Seeing this, the soldier feels increasingly disgusted at how pathetic the boy is. However, he still decides to finish him off with the honor of a Lee. And in his final moments, the protagonist thinks that the heavens are truly cruel. In the end, the boy would die like this. After spending his whole life amid hardships and running away, along with constant failures in a series of things. At that moment, he thought how nice it would be if he had a second chance. Then suddenly, he heard his father's voice calling Yujong. That was the protagonist's mother. But a man informed that when they found her, she was no longer in any condition. And beside this messenger was the patriarch to the esteemed Marshall Lee clan, named Lee Tashin for some reason. The boy notices that he is young, and it is the same with the brother Choi. In this case, Kyle tries to go to his father, but sees two baby hands and paying more attention. He realizes that these are actually his own hands, because he has his memories. The protagonist remembered that he should be dead, so he didn't know if this was an afterlife. However, this time, the name given by his father was Young, and the other children were assigned a maid, and some squad members as guards. Additionally, the patriarch ordered that he be taken to the steel selection ritual, along with the 8th child. The butler, however, intervenes, stating that he is not ready, since the 8th young lady is still a few months older. However, after thinking a bit, Tashin states that it shouldn't matter to his son's surprise, and he simply leaves, leaving the child alone in the nursery. Young can now feel relieved, because his father's presence comes with a surreal pressure anyway. He returns to thinking about what is happening, because it is too real to be just a memory. And that conversation just now was about things that really happened when he was little. In this case, reality starts to become clear to the protagonist, but he feels more worried than happy about returning to the past. A few months after returning to the past, the special day of the esteemed Marshall Lee clan arrived. This was the day of the steel selection ritual, where the clan's children show their talent, corresponding to the weapon that chooses them. Tashin in his time was chosen by dozens of blades, having become the best of his generation. And the eldest brother, who was chosen by swords as well as tones and a staff, became renowned for his magic and swordsmanship. However, this time, the participant is the protagonist, with a new outfit on Young. The maid Moon Gagwa praises the child for looking handsome and not crying, even in a different environment. With that, she holds the boy, wishing him a good result, and states that the little one will have a bright future ahead. To the protagonist, Gagwa was like his real mother, but she was expelled due to the hatred of his other brothers. During all this time, she was the only person who cried for his loneliness and stayed by his side, but this time, he doesn't want to let that happen, and places his hand on the girl's face to return some of the affection, while thinking that you will protect her at all costs. At this moment, someone appears to say that the preparations are ready, so the maid cheers up the young master. Meanwhile, the butler informs the patriarch that the preparations are complete, and thus Tashin decides to act along with him. Many maids follow, each carrying the respective child they are responsible for caring for, until without delay the light shines at the gate's entrance, indicating they're close. And finally the tunnel opens into a huge arena, with a really large audience watching the event. At that moment, comments begin about the legitimate son who was brought from outside, as he is also participating in the ritual. Among those commenting are Matriarch Baek Kwan, Minister Lee Ta-hong, and 2 sons. The first Lee Myan-jong, and the third, Lee Gun-song. The minister in turn finds it interesting that Young is so young, and the first son doesn't remember any of them participating in the ritual at that age, although a bit annoyed when asked if he agrees. The third son also admits it. Gun-song still doesn't know where the child came from, but is definitely curious anyway. The patriarch shouts for everyone to hear that the steel selection ritual is about to begin as the first act of the event. Taishin asked a maid to bring Hua there, and so she returns with the 8th daughter of the Marshall Lee clan, namely Hua, without wasting time. The patriarch takes a small knife from his clothing and grabs the child's hand. Then he simply makes a cut on the tip of her finger, causing her to cry a lot, but also release a bit of her blood. In this way, her essence reacts with the magic of the ritual, leaving everyone curious about what will come, until the girl's energy links to the most prestigious relic, ranked sword called Ivory, a masterpiece that hasn't responded to generations. In this case, the patriarch wastes no time and lifts it with his magic, pulling it to his hand, thus holding the girl in his arms. He declares that from now on, this sword belongs to Hua, causing many to be happy for the matriarch, as a talented child is a reason for celebration for the clan. Then, without getting emotional, Wei Yin simply thanks him, but soon hardens her expression upon realizing that Yang's ritual is next guided by Taishin, because he is a legitimate son. From outside, gossip starts running wild among the audience, and some even question whether a bastard should be allowed to participate in the ritual. Regardless, the patriarch picks up the child and makes the cut, just like he did with all the others. However, since the protagonist does not cry, Tashi makes a point of saying that he is proud. In the end, that fateful day arrived. In the past, the boy was chosen by a clear echo, a divine ranked sword. Now the drop of blood falls from the protagonist's finger, and as it comes into contact with the ritual, he hopes for something that can change his fate once and for all. While the spectators complained about the presence of a bastard in the clan's sacred ritual, the minister noticed the expression of the matriarch, and from what he could see, she seemed to be in a bad mood. But thinking that a hidden son of his brother was there, it was possible to understand her feelings. Naturally, the minister thought that a miserable fate awaited this child, and that it would be very difficult to survive there. As an illegitimate son, meanwhile, an old man appeared, commenting that Tai-hong seemed very interested in the bastard. This was the chief elder of the esteemed Marshall Lee clan, named Lee Heil-jong, faced with him. The minister greeted the elder very carefully, unable to read his thoughts. Heil-jong, in turn, asked if that child was the one the patriarch brought, and the minister confirmed that the squad found him. In response, the old man said he couldn't understand what Taishin was thinking to place a random child there. And to exemplify, he commented that the minister had seen firsthand that the ritual was useless for illegitimate children. Obviously, this provocation made Tai-hong very irritated. However, in a passive-aggressive manner, the old man apologized, saying that the story of how, as illegitimate son, he failed to be selected was famous. But he let slip his opinion that a bastard child is always a bastard, and to intimidate the minister, he said that the child should know his place, which made Ta-hong furious. Then, because of every provocation, the minister shouted that he would no longer tolerate it, but defending his ego was no longer necessary. Right in front of the two, a light shone refuting the old man's argument. And being someone who believed that bastards wouldn't pass the test, the elder couldn't understand. Meanwhile, the minister had never been so excited to witness a miracle like this, despite seeing it with his own eyes. Ta-hong remained confused but extremely euphoric. At that moment, that immense blue light fell into the arena, engulfing everything and everyone in the stands. First, the masterpiece spear of the blood spirit, and the masterpiece has iron blade appeared. Then the relic divine, sword Mahu, and the relic agile dragon divine crossbow also revealed themselves. Obviously, this started to cause general confusion in the audience, as even the own weapons were responding. It was possible to see this from the observatory above, where the first son's sword began to shine, leaving him very surprised. Instead of feeling jealous, Myong-Young simply asked if his brother could believe this, and he praised the youngest, saying he had incredible talent. But Gungsong remained as cold as ever. In addition to the surprise, indignation arose among the crowd, thinking something was wrong to have such a result. However, the patriarch made a point of ordering everyone to be silent, which happened instantly after the command. It was stated that according to clan law, all the weapons that chose Young should belong to him by right. However, as seen, the situation was not that simple. Sebastian announced that he would accept suggestions. In this case, Tae-hong raised his hand saying he had a suggestion, and smiled when the patriarch asked if he had an idea. Without wasting time, he stated that although the clan law grants all the weapons, it goes against the meaning of the ceremony. After all, the steel selection ritual is an event meant to continue for generations. For this reason, the minister proposed that the protagonist choose a single weapon. On his own, thinking this was a good way to handle the situation, the patriarchs decided to accept Tae-hong's suggestion. With his magic, he lifted not only all the weapons, but also the protagonist, later placing him on the ground and asking the boy to choose the one he liked best. With an endless number of options in front of him, the protagonist didn't know why things were different from his past life, but he understood it was a good thing. Deciding to make the most of this situation, Young moved forward and first passed by Frach, the dragon-slaying sword, then the sacred spear, forged from the body of a saint called White Whale. Besides that, there was the option of the staff Alhine, made from a world tree where the fairies sleep, and the celestial sword, which is said to have been forged at the moment when the sun, moon, and stars were aligned. In the end, all of these were great swords for a potential decision, so the boy decided not to worry. But the patriarch worried in his place when he saw which sword his son was walking toward. The sword discovered by the founder in the unexplored lands, covered in dust and full of mysteries, whose hidden power no one understands. This is the Black Twilight Sword, and it is the one the protagonist chooses as his own. The known abilities do not classify it as a divine ranked weapon, but is kept among the others, as a symbol of his relationship with the founder. However, none of the leader's ancestors managed to be chosen by it. Because of that, Tatayon became curious whether this was a meaningless choice made by a small child, or, as he held him in his arms, he wondered if it was something bigger, like another will of the heavens. In any case, the patriarch shouted to the stance that Yang had chosen the Black Twilight as his weapon, and that with this the ritual was over. However, the matriarch felt even more affronted by this new inconvenience that appeared in her life, and without the slightest empathy, she declared that if Young ever crossed her path, she would have no choice but to get rid of him. 9 years later, in his special mansion within the clan, the protagonist informs the Nanning that he is heading to his afternoon training. Now being the 9th son, at 9 years old, in this case Gagwa, extremely worried, asks to escort him along the way. Our hero comments that he can go alone, but the maid insists, changing the subject. Gagwa informs him that the other training zones are empty and asks why he is going to the first one, since it is small. Then the boy replies that someone is waiting for him there, until suddenly the sound of someone screaming catches his attention. It seems the maid comments that the noise is coming from someone in Zone 7, and there it's possible to see a girl being scolded for gripping the sword too tightly. However, she doesn't care and delivers another vertical strike. This is the 8th daughter, namely Hua, also 9 years old for the protagonist. It makes sense for her to be the 8th. But Gagul comments that he should address her as older sister. However, the protagonist didn't want to call the girl that, since they were only 5 months apart. In the girl's training, the demands continue, telling her she must wield the sword as an extension of her body, and warning her to be careful not to hurt herself. The person tells her to do it again. However, she gets so irritated that she simply throws away the wooden sword and questions why the instructor is picking on her so much. Extremely furious, Hua shouts that it doesn't matter how she holds the sword, but the trainer tries to explain that it's for her own good. The same boy tries to calm her down and kindly asks her, with a gentle smile, to keep training. Faced with this, the protagonist asks who that person is, and the maid informs him that it is Commander Back. Leon of the Ebony Squad, however, being a commander young, comments that he is far too skilled to be teaching a 9-year-old child, but the maid interprets this indignation differently than the boy intended. Then she shouts out one day, a teacher who recognizes the young master's talent will appear. With tears in her eyes, Gagwa apologizes for being so incompetent and for not being able to take proper care of him. In this case, the hero gets irritated that she is doing this again and reaffirms how grateful he is. Additionally, Young states that he doesn't want people like that because the man only came there because of the clan's name. And not to mention at this point, the boy already has a few good teachers. In Zone 1, the training area, exclusive to the direct lineage in the esteemed Martial Hall. This is the place that symbolizes the remarkable history of the esteemed Martial League clan. But nowadays, it is used more as a symbolic space than as an actual training area, despite that there's a reason our hero is there. And that reason is behind a certain door that's about to open. Now, the value of Zone 1 is that compared to the other training areas, this place stores older weapons. And among them, after searching a bit, the boy finds the sword he was looking for. And with a smile on his face, he wonders if he should use it today. After going back 9 years into the past, some surprising changes occurred for the protagonist. And the most surprising of all was a certain black energy he could control when concentrating and when diving even deeper into concentration. It actually granted the ability to read memories embedded in weapons. Thus, when Young enters the memories, he encounters someone saying to refine the fundamentals, since they are the same for both beginners and advanced fighters. So the hero follows the training of the sword's previous owner. And over time, he realized that the older the weapon, the more incredible it was. The memory said that mastering the basics of a sword would make a person unshakable, like a pillar, and the more attached the weapon was to the owner, the more the hero could see of the past. Thus activating the first form of the 7-star sword, the ability Scarlet Wind, is used. Young feels extremely happy to finally complete this technique, but over the last 2 years, he had read the memories of most of the weapons. However, at this moment, someone appears, saying it had been a long time since they saw a 7-star sword. So perfect, this was Minister to him, who enters the training center with a smile on his face. Li Tahong is a rank 4 martial artist and a general of the clan. Even though he is outside the direct lineage, his skills were recognized. And in the past, he was one of those who cared for the hero. Happily, the protagonist greets his uncle, but the minister waves off all that formality. Either way, he is proud to see the boy coming to the training hall every day. As he goes to work, Tae Huang sympathizes with the boy, saying, he knows how hard it is to be discriminated against by his brothers, so he hopes that Young will overcome it. In response, the hero states that he is fine because despite everything, he is still part of the lineage. Moreover, over time, he learned that the meaning behind the clan's name was to prove oneself with the sword. Therefore, with his eyes shining with excitement, Young declares that he will prove himself with his own strength. Hearing words like that from a child makes the minister hopeful, but at the same time disappointed, because the boy is an illegitimate son anyway, since Young is almost at the age to attend the naming ceremony, even if it's a bit late. The minister asks to become the boy's teacher from now on, however completely breaking his expectations. The protagonist states that he cannot accept. Unable to understand, Taehan questions whether it isn't enough. Then the hero reminds him that there is a rule that forbids it, despite that the minister informs him that all the brothers are already breaking the rules by being trained and eating the best possible. However, the hero believes that the rules should not be broken, even if everyone else is breaking them. And as he said before, he truly wants to prove himself with his own strength. This makes the minister question whether this child is really 9 years old, and think of him as someone very similar to his older brother. Inevitably, Tung Hong understands that he won't be able to change the child's mind, and with great pride he pats the hero's head, saying he's as stubborn as his father. But with that said, the minister comments that he's bothered by not being able to do anything. For the protagonist, in this case, he asked if there was anything the hero needed, and Yang was just waiting for the opportunity. Because of this, even feeling a bit embarrassed, he said he needed a favor, and since the Hong seemed receptive, Yang smiled slightly. Then, without further mystery, the protagonist asked to see what was under the secret storage. Sometime later, a very expensive car approaches a gate guarded by security, and one of them asks the vehicle to stop and promptly requests the driver to reveal his identity and the purpose of the visit. Thus introducing himself as General Li Taihang, he states that he is only going to perform a regular storage inspection, and by his side, the minister introduces the protagonist, saying that he is on a field trip. In this case, the guard accepts both of their explanations, confirms the identity, and allows them to pass. Like a great actor, the protagonist pretends to be fascinated, as if he were truly excited about the storage. So the minister asks if he is really that thrilled. In response, the hero comments that yes, because the secret storage is where the family's greatest treasures are kept. Moreover, the most important thing of all is that the item the boy is looking for is also there. There is a saying for those who try to find the legendary weapons. Like the ancient relics that few know exist, all things can be found in the secret storage of the esteemed marshal, Li Clan. And this proves to be more real the deeper they go into the place. Before taking the elevator, Tae-hong informs that the basement of the secret storage is where the seal weapons are kept. In this case, Young says he's heard that there are monster-level weapons that devour their owners, and the minister does not deny it. He even plays along, saying that just by holding one of those weapons, both the body and the heart will be consumed. Right after explaining, Tae-young asks if the boy is scared, so Young tries to act brave anyway. The minister informs that there's no need to worry, because they won't be able to enter such a dangerous place. And so, while his uncle announces that he will take care of his business, upstairs the protagonist says goodbye to explore alone, and as the elevator closes, he relaxes a little from pretending to be an innocent child. The basement of the secret storage is also known as the weapon graveyard, because it is a place where countless weapons and relics are sealed. The hero in turn came there to find a certain weapon among all of them. This is the unlimited. Normally, it takes the form of a dagger, but if mana is injected, its length, shape, and other properties can change freely. Lee Gun-song, who found the unlimited in the secret storage in his past life, obtained the title Constant Change because of the weapon's versatility. That title was the reason the third son became patriarch, instead of the first, who was the most likely candidate. And then, after some time, he found the protagonist hiding and eliminated him. That is all he knows so far. To prevent the same thing from happening again, Yang knows what he has to do. And although it's something that will take a while, the hero must check each one. Therefore, using his black flame, he is determined to obtain the unlimited before Lee Gung-song. This time, sometime later, the boy continues searching for the weapon among those in the storage. Since the beginning of the search, an hour has passed, and despite checking everything that looks like a dagger, the unlimited has not appeared. However, the hero believes that it is definitely somewhere there, and that he probably hasn't checked everything yet. That's why he decides to inspect the counter next to him. But before going, he accidentally bumps into one, causing it to fall to the ground with a loud noise, since it is very rusty. Yang gets curious about how it got so deteriorated, but before he could touch it, the dagger backed away, and instead of his hands, flames first cover the dagger. Yang panics, unable to understand why this is happening. But suddenly the flames engulf everything until in an instant, the protagonist wakes up in a place completely different from normal and standing over hundreds of bodies and swords. He tries to understand where he is, until he realizes it could be the memory of the rusty dagger. Despite that, it is different from the weapon memories he has seen so far, because Yang felt it so vividly that it was as if he were physically there. Since the sensations are also perceived, something catches the hero's attention, making him look behind, and there he finds an overwhelming presence that even nature itself would fear, if it still existed. A primitive monster that emerged from a blue hole long ago and swallowed entire civilizations. This was an apocalypse-ranked monster. And this very monster was standing in front of the protagonist. Little by little, his legs begin to tremble, and the boy starts thinking he is about to meet his end, especially since Young knows he is not capable of facing something like this. The first thing that comes to mind is the need to run as fast as possible. However, among the corpses, suddenly a person stands up holding a sword dripping with blood, and as he stops behind the protagonist, the boy notices the presence of this warrior. However, just as it was difficult to see him approaching, the same swordsman disappeared at high speed. With extreme courage, this warrior jumped onto the monster to try to attack it, and using his trump card, he unleashed the ability Demon Slash, which was the only sword strike capable of splitting the enemy in half. As if by a miracle, an incandescent golden light completely pierced through the beast, and from that a powerful explosion emerged, even bigger than the slash itself. Then leaving behind only pieces fallen from the sky, Young was completely speechless. To defeat a monster of that level with just one attack, the hero obviously becomes curious about this person. However, unexpectedly, the warrior notices the protagonist's presence, and also becomes curious about who he is. John tries to form some words, but nothing comes out of his throat. So the warrior questions why a child is there, and saying it is an act of mercy, simply informs the boy that he will eliminate and without pain, which is by trying to avoid happens. But luckily, it only brings him back to the real world, still quite worried and gasping. The hero lets the dagger fall to the floor, trembling with fear as he wonders what that scene was just now. Even now, the pressure that was weighing on the boy's body remained, as if it were real life, but the rusty dagger, little by little, begins to revitalize to the hero's surprise, thus grabbing it with his hand. No longer has any doubts. So the boy quickly makes a cut on his finger, because this time, he will be the one to become the master of 10,000 soldiers. At the same instant, a bright blue light spreads throughout the room, coming exclusively from the blade. And as it surrounds the dagger like an aura, Young decides to run a test to confirm its power. But after performing just a simple horizontal slash, it becomes clear to the hero that he has finally found the treasure. He came to the storage for the unlimited. Later, apparently, on another day, some sounds are heard from training zone number 1, but the protagonist is disappointed and failed again after striking the wooden dummy. Since the visit to the secret storage, it has been a week since he obtained the unlimited. Initially, the protagonist transformed the sword he found that day into a ring so that people would notice. However, he still couldn't fully understand what exactly that move was. That the man used the Demon Slash for the hero. The man probably just showed the technique, because it was too early to learn. But regardless of strength or technique, that man's movements were so graceful that the boy couldn't replicate them. However, the protagonist holds one of the swords and continues his training with excitement, because he is in no rush before his regression. The hero was a reject, who couldn't even perform the family's basic techniques. And even though it is just one, this is his first time seeing such advanced martial arts. Unfortunately, Young can clearly remember how that man moved. We finished off that monster. At this moment, an idea comes to the hero's mind when thinking about that man, since he is not an adult like the warrior, but a 9-year-old child. That's why if he tries to imitate the movements of an adult, it won't be effective at all. So logically, everything needs to be adapted to his own body in a slow and natural way. Without wasting time, the protagonist closes his eyes to concentrate and trying to wield the sword in a way that suits his body, but still maintains the technique. The boy manages to perform a powerful strike that breaks the ground on his very first attempt, which after witnessing this, makes him very happy with how he is improving his abilities. At this moment, Young believes that he only needs to solve the problem of using mana, because no matter how many times he tries to replicate it using mana, the way he remembers so far, all attempts have failed, as if he has forgotten something very important. That Young understands that he has no choice but to keep trying. And from the back of the room, while the protagonist tries again, a woman observes everything with a mischievous smile on her face. During his training, Young swings the sword to the sides, but suddenly the same girl stops the hero's blade with her bare hand. and thus catches the child's attention by asking where he learned that skill. At first contact, the protagonist asks who this person is, even though his intuition indicates she is someone from the martial Lee clan. Then the girl seems a little surprised that the boy doesn't know her. However, she concludes that this might be normal, since she doesn't usually go out much anyway. She asks the boy's name, and he replies that it is Young. Hearing this, the girl gets excited, saying it's a unique name, and introduces herself as Li Gao Ma while shaking the boy slightly. In the past, the minister spoke a bit about her, and the hero remembered that because she was different from others, her grandfather hated her. But there is something even more important, the fact that Jaina doesn't hold back her strength against other people. Returning to the seriousness of the main topic, the girl questions where the child learned that ability, trying to avoid the situation. Young replies by asking why she wants to know. Then Jaina explains that what he just used was an ancient martial art, and because she likes him a lot, she's curious to clarify. The girl comments that ancient monsters lived a long time ago, and from her sleeve, she pulls out a gift. Naturally, the hero doesn't understand, but when asked to open it, he does. Young realizes it's hard to read because of the handwriting, but it's a mana technique, along with other things about martial arts. Since the level is quite high, it becomes difficult to understand. But it makes the boy think that the rumors about his aunt might be false. At a certain point, Yum asked about a passage. So Diama explains that these are old mana techniques that use mana pathways as a base. In the past, only mana pathways were used instead of circles, different from modern techniques that store everything in the heart. Something Young hadn't considered, however. Guy on the comments. That maybe human techniques from the past were even better than those of today. And that's precisely why there are so few records. But among everything, one mana technique stands out. Therefore, without wasting time, the protagonist runs off, leaving his arm behind. The sword in hand, Young concentrates, thinking that since mana spreads from the circle to the body, he should reject the return to the circle, and thus use only the mana pathways to make it flow freely. In the end, this was the mana utilization technique of the man that the boy couldn't understand before. So knowing this, the protagonist is sure it could work now. And when replicating the same technique as before, the damage is dozens of times greater, making both his aunt and the protagonist himself unable to believe it. Having succeeded, Young gets ready to celebrate. A year after that, the maid appears running, calling the young master to the training center for this reason. Together with his aunt, the hero, now 10 years old, asks, "What brings the nanny there?" And then a bit anxious, Gagwa hands over a letter that has arrived. And although Gyanga doesn't know what it's about, the protagonist have been waiting for it for a long time. It is the summons for the naming ceremony, where he must visit the central training hall at 10 a.m. on September 10th. However, the seal on the letter was made by a representative of the patriarch named Lee Myung-jun. And since he hadn't heard anything about expeditions, the hero became curious to know why his father wasn't home. Young on her part screams extremely angrily because it's a naming ceremony. Then the hero asks why, and she replies that now that she is improving, she needs John's guidance. However, he will have to be away for a while if he goes to the ceremony, since the agreement a year has passed, in which the two have been researching mana techniques. The modern mana techniques that use a mana circle as the core, and the ancient techniques that use the pathways as the core. However, the two managed to identify a new type of technique that combines the best of both. And Jae-hyung said that successfully making this combination was her dream. Accumulating mana, transforming its peculiarities into a circle, and using the pathways to control and utilize it was the method that improved the hero. And because his aunt kept complaining a lot, he says that he has to go anyway. However, he asked her not to worry because it will take less time than usual, and because he intends to continue the work. Jie Yanga, on her part, questions this, saying that the boy will be busy with lessons. But Yang states that he will continue training the mana technique and recovering the ancient techniques. At the same time, sometime later in an incubator, it is said that the training will start today, and that they must first endure magical attacks for 30 minutes. And this time the past is different again, Because the instructor is the leader of the Blood Tiger squad, Jang Wook, the instructor in turn, predicted that the ninth son would fail this right away, since he had received basic training. However, he was using mana techniques to reflect the magical attacks away, and a look he gives Jang Wook is enough to make the instructor scared. Young is testing himself right now and comparing himself to the 8th daughter to reach her level, forcing Wook to raise the level. However, he is still just a 10-year-old illegitimate child, but the instructor thinks that calling him that, after seeing his talent, is rude. Therefore, Wook believes it's better to reflect on his past behavior, and now did his best to teach everything he can, offering more than just basic lessons for the naming ceremony. Sometime later, the protagonist finally finishes his training in the incubator, but he can't help but think, how crazy. The idea of throwing a child into a device that attacks with magic to build resistance is. Anyway, the protagonist reflects a bit on what happened. He wasn't expecting an apology from the instructor, attacking the protagonist. She manages to defend against without a problem, then calling the boy a bastard. Li Hua, the clan's direct lineage, states that they need to talk. Faced with this, Young pulls his hand away and asks what she's trying to do. However, Hua yells at him to be more respectful, because she's a legitimate daughter and 1 year older. Despite this, Young doesn't want to deal with it, and says he doesn't have time to talk to her. Thus, Wu becomes furious and yells not to be ignored, while strengthening her fist with mana. Initially, the protagonist just wanted to ignore it, but he realized it wouldn't be possible, and dodged before grabbing the girl by the neck. But instead of hitting her, he simply reaffirms that he is busy, and that the girl can go cry in her mother's arms. With nothing more to say, Young lets go of the girl while sighing in frustration. However, whole events about what happened during the seal selection, and yells that she's always being compared to him. She claims that it's not fair, and that she can't even sleep at night because she's always training. Then the hero covers her mouth before she can continue complaining. Young comments that it's convenient to blame others all the time, but as a bastard child, he can't even do that. And he says that if he can't do something, then he simply doesn't thus. If the girl is resentful, he advises her to do everything possible to surpass him and earn an apology, because that's how this family works. Extremely irritated by this arrogance, Hua accepts the challenge to do much better at the naming ceremony, but warns that she will make him beg for forgiveness. And instead of feeling intimidated, Yang says he is looking forward to it. In Zone 7 of the training hall, exclusive to the direct lineage, the madam of the esteemed Li Marshall clan, Bak Huang, suddenly appears. Therefore, she asks to speak with her daughter and is LED by the maid. Upon arriving at the training ground, Hua is working hard, so the lady of the house asks what her daughter is doing, drawing attention a bit intimidated. Hua says she was training, but Bak had already heard the news of her defeat because of that. With a serious look, she reminded the girl of what she had said about crushing her rivals. At this moment, Bakes says she is disappointed with her daughter and tells her to stop training, if she is doing it just to avoid being scolded. However, even knowing that this is her mother's view, the girl explains that she is training because she wants to, therefore with determination. She states that she will defeat the hero no matter what, because that is her greatest desire. Faced with this, Bake realizes that her daughter was motivated by a bastard child, and inevitably Wai admits that yes. In that case, the mother reminds her that she is a legitimate child with a different status, and that winning should be something guaranteed, not a reason for motivation. Because of this, the mother pulls from her clothing a vial of a lethal poison called Serial Trance, and quite coldly Bake advises that if she cannot surpass him, then she must crush him. Because even though it's difficult to say this to a child, this is how things work in this family. Back at the mansion where the protagonist lives, Ismay comments that it makes no sense when looking at the computer. That's because the 14th week report ranked the protagonist as number 1. In this case, Gagul hugs him proudly for the result he achieved, even though she wasn't able to help at all. However, breaking this happy moment between them, a noise is heard, and soon the aunt appears, wanting to train with a child. Obviously, the hero refuses because he just finished, but Jiang says that precisely because of that, they should continue to relieve fatigue. Young says he's never heard of such a thing, So the ant tries to lie as best as she can anyway. The hero says it's fine because he has something to show, then realizing what it is. The ant becomes extremely surprised and screams, unable to believe that he has obtained his first star. Normally, it is necessary to go through 3 stages of man arts. The first being the iron body stage, where one strengthens the body. The second in turn is the Kai Gong stage, where you change the nature of your mana. And the third is the extraordinary skill stage, where it becomes possible to demonstrate supernatural abilities through mana, but the mana arts of the boy's ant are different, because even the first stage, it is possible to show more abilities. This is the reason why the mana arts are divided into star stages. After checking, the ant is sure that this is indeed a star, but she still finds it strange, because she thought it would take a year. In response, the hero said he learned while watching the lessons, but when he failed to control mana, the balance of the pathways almost shattered. With it, you learned what you should have let go of, because mana flows naturally like water, and the human body itself is a vehicle for mana. Faced with this explanation, Gayama comments that she should be able to do it too, even if it takes a little while. Then the hero feels a bit proud, because at least she realized that much. But the ant still expresses all her gratitude with a tight hug that almost breaks him ribs. With no more obstacles, Diana is excited for them to pursue the path of 2 stars, which the hero thinks is a bit rushed. In this case, she comments that the first star is different from the traditional first stage, but the protagonist already knows that. Then the girl asks what he thinks is better. And at the moment he was about to say swordsmanship is interrupted. Yang tries to argue, saying that she has never seen his training, but she actually seen it when she was bored. In short, what Gianna means is that he has a skill, more exceptional than swordsmanship. This skill is the boy's use of man arts, which comes as a surprise to the hero. It is explained that his talent in this aspect is so incredible that it overshadows everything else, because no one has ever managed to follow the techniques she taught, and that is precisely why the ant is certain that it won't be difficult for the boy to reach 2 stars. Furthermore, if he achieves this, Dion states that the naming ceremony will be a piece of cake. In any case, from now on, the ant says she will teach real techniques, and Young excitedly agrees. But even so, as he gets up, our hero asks what that is beside her, and realizing he's talking about the box, she simply places her hand on top of it. However, in an instant, a projectile is launched near Young's face, exploding behind him then, with a smile on her face. The girl says that the box is full of metal pellets. For now, the hero needs to learn how to move while releasing mana, since using mana arts while standing still is the same as dying. Finally, with determination, Gemma asks if they can start, and Young doesn't refuse despite his concern. On the afternoon of another day, the 9th and the 8th children gather in a training arena. Introducing himself as another leader of the Blood Tiger squad, Jean Won says he will teach the clan's techniques to them. Thus, he asked the children to choose their weapons and come toward him. But since he'll only give them 1 minute, he asked them not to waste time, which both of them understand. As they walk toward the weapons, the hero notices the girl's expression directed at him, already very irritated. He asks what Hoi is looking at and whether she has something to say, but the girl pretends not to understand. To make conversation, she asks if Yang is going to pick a sword, but our hero denies it, and he simply climbs up to the arena with several swords in hand, leaving the 9th daughter quite confused. Upon reaching the top, John 1 asks what the boy is doing, so he reminds him of the order given. In this case, the squad leader commented that Young should have brought the weapon he uses, but the hero replied that he uses all of them, which left John 1 a little curious. Despite this, the instructor loudly judges the protagonist as a complete fool, and taking the spear from his back, he asks him to remember what he is about to say from now on. Zhongguan said that he would teach the clan's secret techniques, but didn't say anything about teaching the stances or skills. Among the secret arts of the esteemed Li martial clan, there are various flames of enlightenment, and to learn these secret arts, one must master the basics, which is practically the same as awakening the dormant 6th sense in the body. Because of this, the instructor warns that he will awaken that sense right now, and with his combat stance ready, he asks them not to have too much difficulty in completing the objective. John 1 appeared in front of him, and at lightning speed, he threw the protagonist backward with an attack. That left no chance for defense. Despite this, John 1 is already quite impressed by the fact that Young was not hit directly, but at this moment, the hero is extremely tense, because he has to do this once again before returning. The protagonist had not received this training properly, but with a determined expression, he advanced, certain that in this life it would be different. Despite the protagonist's confidence, he receives a blow to the face that intercepts his attack. Then, trying to take advantage of the instructor's lack of attention, to his rear will tries to defeat him as well, but both are easily suppressed. Jumping a bit into the future, it has already been a month since they started training with John 1, and that was such harsh training that their bones would break, and they suffered internal injuries. Clearly, it was not the type of training that a 10-year-old child should be doing. But instead of crying, Young was starting to enjoy it. Suddenly, in yet another one of these daily fights, Hua wakes up on the ground without knowing where she is. So out of curiosity, the hero explains that this is the 22nd time the girl has fainted, unlike him, who is on his 16th time. While the two are talking, John 1 thinks that the 8th child has a resilient body, because even when attacking harder, she continues to be fine. As for the other illegitimate child, the leader had already felt on the first day that he was not just anyone. At first, John 1 thought the boy was a fool for bringing a bunch of weapons, but he proved himself proficient with all of them. Moreover, after only 1 month of training, the instructor gets excited because he realizes that Young is starting to get the hang of it. Without further delay, John 1 informs the 2 children that training will resume, so he asks them to return to their positions. After some time, with both extremely tired, the hero calls his sister's attention, which makes her ask what it is. Then Young informs her that he will give a signal, and that Wall should block John 1 wants for him. Naturally, Wall questioned why she should, but the hero convinced her, with a desire to land a hit on the instructor. Thus what? Asks if the hero is sure, and with determination, Young affirms that he is wasting no more time. The girl charges forward, saying that the protagonist will owe her one, and right behind Young follows her, while thinking that there's no chance of victory with his current skill level, which is precisely why he has no choice but to use the numerical advantage in his favor. Young 1 in turn comments that the idea of working together is not a bad decision, but only if things go according to the boy's plan, which the instructor will not allow. Quickly, Young 1 launches a counterattack and is very surprised that the hero manages to block it. Then he charges forward to test the boy's limits, and at the moment when both of their spears were about to clash, the protagonist shouted that it was time. So while moving away, Wall approached from above to keep the instructor busy for a moment, being a little behind. The hero understands that there is only one way to land, a direct attack right now. Therefore, he begins to channel aura into his sword, to replicate the ultimate attack he obtained from the Limitless, the skill of the slashing demon. That defeated an apocalypse-level monster. In an instant, it unreaches the instructor, which makes him surprised. Furthermore, John 1's guard is high and the hero's attack is low. Then the protagonist thinks that this will work, and puts all this effort into a direct punch, feeling quite proud of it. However, to his misfortune, John 1 had blocked the strike with extreme ease, and in a second, a devastating counterattack came, sending the protagonist flying into the nearest wall, destroying everything with the impact on his back. With the boy defeated, the instructor announces that it has been 37 days, and feeling a bit proud, congratulates Young for awakening his sixth sense. However, while attacking Hua, he states that the boy still has a long way to go. And so, with both children completely unconscious, John 1 announced that training was over for today, as the instructor leaves, who starts arguing with the protagonist because the plan failed. However, John 1 could only think that, besides having broken his own rule of not using mana, the attack even pierced through an injury his hand. In any case, the instructor admitted Yang's combat sense, and became eager to see the fear of the elders in the future. After 47 days of training, who finally awakened her sixth sense, which allowed both to graduate And so Yang used the remaining time to rest and review, until one of those days. The protagonist had an unexpected visitor at his house, and that visitor was his older brother, Li Myunjong, who was there for some reason. The first son of Li Taxian is Li Myunjong, the one who received the title of star, is currently practically a rank 2 in magic and martial arts. People admire him as much as they fear him, but for the hero, he was simply his only brother. At a tea table, Myung-jun apologizes for not paying much attention to the youngest, but Young says it's all right. Changing the subject, the older brother finds it interesting that the protagonist recognizes him the first time they meet in person. But for the hero, it was something logical since even being a half-brother, he was the eldest and very famous. Myung, in turn, feels bad about this term and affirms that he is as much a brother as the others because he thinks Yang is being too hard on himself in this case. Yang apologizes, but that wasn't what the older brother wanted either. After all, Myung prefers to talk informally, which Yang accepts, remembering how kind he was in the past. Without further delay, the older brother announces that he will give a gift from when he attended the Eiffel Magic University in France. Then he pulls from his sleeve a miraculous medicine called nectar, or wine of the gods. This is a high-class medicine, and since only 500 more are produced per year, it is very valuable, so the hero thanks his brother. After a few seconds of silence, Myung comments that the youngest is a bit different. To explain, he says that until now, all the other siblings saw him as a rival, and this is different from the protagonist. However, Yang makes a point of saying that he is mistaken, and clarifies that as members of the same clan, they are all rivals therefore. The hero asked not to be treated like a cute little brother, because he could end up becoming a challenging opponent, but instead of causing concern. This only made Myung laugh a lot at the situation. Then ruffling his hair, the older brother said he would be looking forward to the day that became reality. And since this was his older brother who had always cared for him, Young agreed, but thought to himself that this time, he would be the one to protect him. A few days later, it was the day of the second trial of the esteemed Lee Marshall clan. Naming ceremony arrived, and they had to travel to the place by boat. The Red and Blue Island is an island where the color of the land changes, depending on the amount of mana in the atmosphere. As always serve as the location for the ceremony. To pass the test, it is said that they must survive on the island for 3 weeks, and to assist, the devices on the box will track the locations of both. The judgment camera will remain open for 2 days after the end of the 3-week period. So with the children prepared and already on the shore, the instructor simply wishes them good luck. The moment they arrive on the island, Hua announces that she has something to say. Therefore, Nan feels relieved that she has finally made up her mind, which leaves her confused. The truth is that the hero knows. She has been trying to say something to him since the beginning of classes, and although she questions it very embarrassed, this was already very clear to Young. Getting straight to the point, the protagonist asks her to speak, because at the very least, he will listen. So Wo starts fiddling with the device on her jacket, and her look indicates that she wants the protagonist to do the same by moving the communicator away. Doing so, her hero says he is ready and asks why. Then Wo simply pulls from her pocket the deadly poison, surreal trance that her mother gave her, leaving Young surprised from what she knows. The girl explains that it is only effective against children, causing a defect in the mana pathway, and that if exposed to air for 5 minutes, it evaporates. Naturally, the question of who gave it to her would come, so Hua made it clear that she would not say, and she simply smashed the vial on a rock, because now there would be no more evidence about it. Turning to the main subject, the girl states that she will defeat the hero, precisely without the poison. Therefore, she needs him to take the test seriously with all his strength. However, even if she hadn't said that, the protagonist responded enthusiastically that he would do his best anyway, which made both of them determined. First of all, what asked him to be prepared when challenging the center of the island, because it is a dangerous place. Then the hero asks if she is worried, and the two start arguing until a strange noise catches their attention. Thus the girl simply asks the protagonist not to die, while announcing that she is leaving now. And as she leaves, Yun thinks to himself that his destiny is not in the corners of the island. Therefore, even though the test is just beginning, our hero decides to head straight to the center of the island through the security cameras. The overseers notice that the 8th daughter is doing very well so far. She had already finished hunting a large number of animals, despite it being her first practical experience. Because of that, the elder boasts about these achievements, remembering the master who awakened her. And he asked the instructor behind him if it really has only been 47 days, to which he responds that yes, although she wasn't that strong before. Since it was expected to take 2 months for John Wine, is a fact that girl has decent talent. But it's also true that someone provoked her to improve faster, and that someone is the 9th son, Leon. Speaking of him, the elder asks what the boy is doing, so the instructor suggests that he is probably looking for a hiding place. In this case, everyone judges the child as a coward, who is not worthy of being in the same clan. Everyone except his first brother, who orders everyone to be quiet. Mayeonjong, standing next to the minister, states that finding a hiding spot in a dangerous environment should be considered strategic. A bit embarrassed, the others agree, admitting that they raised their expectations too much, with the 8th child in any case. The elder insists on saying that being normal in the Lee Marshall clan is a sin and asks if he's right about that. This inevitably causes the popular opinion to shift to his side. Once again, Mayeon cannot believe that the clan is so low as to mock a child because of his origin, but he also thinks that maybe has always been this way, although he also wants to know why. The protagonist is heading straight for the center of the island, and when he looks to his side, Myung notices that apparently he is not the only one with this concern. In this case, while the protagonist chooses a place, his brother continues trying to find an answer. With a suitable spot quickly found, our hero burns a medicinal herb and blocks the entrance with leaves. This makes even the most critical members of the clan praise his camouflage skills. However, suddenly, something catches the elder's attention, because the boy is removing the devices. Young places them on leaves and grabs a few more to cover everything. Within seconds, the transmission completely, and so in the control room, all they can see is darkness where the device was stored. However, the instructor becomes very excited about this, which is different from the brothers who feel tired from so much worry. Back to the test, the protagonist comments that there is no reason to show his skills to them. After all now, he can use the limitless freely, and since he is stuck on this island, our hero wants to enjoy it as much as possible. Therefore, with a determined expression on his face, Yum is ready to move forward sometime later. The hero definitely does not look excited about the dinner he will have tonight. Cooking is almost ready, but the food still looks terrible, making it hard to believe it's a manna herb tea, since the hero didn't have enough money to buy an elixir. In his past life, he learned these techniques from an apothecary. Actually, it was his aunt who told him that. So if he drinks the tea, Young believes it might be effective. Either way, the boy needs to increase his total mana, and will have to face it sometime later. Morning arrives on the island, and the pot with the elixir is finally empty. Young had spent the entire night managing to drink that, marking the beginning of a 3-week-long solitary struggle. On the 18th day of the naming ceremony in the office of the first son, Lee Myung, he was working when someone asked to enter. Soon the person apologizes for the interruption, but the air lets it go since it seems to be bad news. Wasting no time, the vice leader of the Blue Sword Squad, Yujanjian, reports that a large group of vagabonds entered the northern region of South Korea. The subordinate expected them to go to the unexplored region, but they're heading south, and the clan's Mana Stone mines are 2 days away. Since bandits usually go to unexplored regions to commit crimes, Myung comments that they are probably plotting something. Jang Hyun in turn comments that the vagabond appearance could be a disguise for some force behind them. He also learned that the Fortress of the Nine Dragons is moving its forces toward the northern border. In Jonyuan, there is the giant organization Fortress of the Nine Dragons, and the clan shares a border with them, frequently provoked by them as they trespass into Lee territory. The fact that the father of the first son is not home right now may have leaked, so Myung asks if the intelligence branch knows about this. However, Janjin managed to find out faster than the branch, So the hare asks his subordinate to cooperate with the branch, to uncover more after all. He believes there are more things to discover. But Myung-young sincerely hopes it's nothing more than a bad feeling. However, in a nearby forest, under the moonlight, a magic circle appears on the ground. And from that circle, an intense light emerges, along with a crack in space-time that, when fully opened, proves to be a portal from it. A suspicious man steps out with a smile on his face, because he believes that 2 nights will be enough to kill an illegitimate child. The next day, on the Red and Blue Island, the amount of mana in the air remains dense, and suddenly a huge monster's foot stomps on the ground, revealing the draconic rank 7 monster Draco, who appears to be furious. Our hero, in turn, is standing before it, already a bit tired from so much fighting. But he doesn't have time to rest, because the dragon inflates its throat, and then releases a fire roar that destroys everything in front of it. Fortunately, at the moment the attack approaches, the protagonist manages to dodge just in time, and so using his mana on the sword, Yang uses the fire energy that blocks the vision to his advantage. He jumps onto the dragon and counterattacks with all this strength, using the slashing demon technique. It strikes the monster on its head, leaving it completely defeated and burned on the ground, with the fight over. Young comments that dragons are on a different level, and admits that if he had fought when he first arrived, he would have lost. The hero reached the dragon's territory 19 days after entering the Red and Blue Island, but staying there any longer would be a waste. Especially because there is another reason the boy came here. Besides that, before doing anything else, suddenly a noise is heard. So the hero prepares to fight again, and he hides where he can to better analyze the situation, until he realizes it as expected. In front of him is a squad of rank 8 monsters, the Lizard Man. It seems that something has been wrong since the previous day, because lizard men should only appear on the outskirts of the island. Moreover, they are attacking and fleeing, which is unusual for non-intelligent beings. I mean, the monsters might be affected by something. And if that's the case, the protagonist moves forward to investigate for himself, until before attacking, one of the lizards reacts strangely once again, which consequently confirms Young's theory. Then without any mercy, he finishes off 2 of them, not believing in coincidences, but still leaves the last one alive so he can follow it. On the other side of the island, phrases like "face the Marshall clan" are heard repeatedly, until the person responsible for this is shown, while thinking that the Lee bloodline is really peculiar. At the same time, when the surviving lizard arrives, the man cannot understand how such a young boy defeated so many monsters. Yet the man still believes he will be fine, because at the end of the day, Young is still just a little boy. And to the tamer Nishiyama Shugo, he is a little boy who will fall into his most obvious trap. So when that happens, Shugo won't need to resort to Plan B. Protagonist narrowly avoided falling into that trap, and managed to realize that his enemy was a tamer. However, he still didn't understand how an outsider managed to get in there. Till you remember that it wouldn't be impossible if a teleportation circle had been prepared somewhere, which meant this was probably something that a member of the Lee clan had set up. At that moment, the only thing on the hero's mind was to notify the house and wait for reinforcements. However, Young is aware that they would arrive too late, and that he wouldn't be able to discover who was responsible. Therefore, of all the options, only one remained: to use his stealth arts to solve this himself. First, the hero hides his presence with stealth arts, and then the moment he finds an opening, he uses all this strength to approach and defeat the tamer. Just one strike in the last moment before the attack. The object Shogo carries begins to shine and scream, making the man realize what is happening. Unfortunately for the protagonist, it was a danger detection artifact, and even though he was faster, the strike was blocked facing each other. The tamer comments that the boy is much better than expected. However, the hero replies that it is he who is weak, which makes Shogo so irritated that he stops talking to attack, in this case using the 3rd form, called True Blue from the 7-star sword technique. The protagonist aims to finish it all, but suddenly he feels something strange, because his body can no longer move completely euphoric. Shibuto laughs out loud because the boy fell for it, and he explains that this is the most advanced type of formation that blocks mana circles, incapacitating martial artists. However, instead of being scared, the protagonist uses this information to change his mana control strategy. After all, if the circles are restricted, he can simply use his pathways instead. Thus, right after breaking the chains and defeating the lizard, with just one strike, Young reaches the tamer in an instant, and at the same moment, the boy passes over him to end up in front of him, and questioning with the sword pointed at Shugo if he's already given up on running away. With great surprise, the tamer asked how Young broke free, but the hero not only did not answer, but also informed that he had already notified the house about him. Because of that, the obvious thing would be for him to surrender. But Shogo stated that he would eliminate the boy, and thus regain his freedom. Then, before the protagonist could even understand the meaning of that, something appeared in front of him, breaking his sword and hitting him directly, causing our hero to be thrown against a tree with a devastating impact. Then, after a few seconds lying on the ground, Young understands the gravity of the situation, because in front of him is the guardian of the red and blue island, called the Turtle-Headed Mountain. This is a rank 3 monster, and since the tamer is not of a high level, he warns that he can only control one command anyway. The command to attack the hero was given. So Shogo advises the boy to give up and just accept his fate. Suddenly, a large amount of paper with inscriptions is thrown into the air, confirming the command. But since Shogo does not have full control over it, the hero tries to stay calm and focus on the tamer, to be able to do something against the Turtle-Headed Mountain. What is in his hand is the only option. This is the medicine that was banned, because the side effects were too intense compared to the positives. A mana enhancer, however. There is one more thing, which is the technique is Onbyon, that told him to use only in the most dangerous situations, which is exactly the case now. Still gathering all his strength, the hero uses the heaven-challenging technique and disappears like lightning to practically teleport to the top of the guardian. Although he performs a successful attack, the protagonist could not even scratch it. Therefore, for his next move, he decides to defeat it in a different way, interrupting the preparation. The monster starts gathering dense energy in its mouth, and the hero gets worried because he realizes this is the fear roar of the Turtle-Headed Mountain. At this moment, he can no longer move because of the mana waves. But suddenly that dark energy from before starts to show itself again. And for some reason, the hero's dark power managed to resist the fear effect. In this case, Young wastes no time, using the chance he got and charges forward with everything. Then, using the first technique of the infinite, he reproduces the cutting demon ability with even more strength, until the monster's roar is reflected into the sky. But not everything is a victory, because Young starts to feel the effects of the medicine. On his knees on the ground, the hero won't be able to move for a while, because of the intense side effects, including sharp chest pain. However, in the last 10 seconds of strength left, Young runs determined to find the tamer. Thus more than half the time passes, until suddenly a red line is seen by the boy on the ground, and with only 3 seconds. This line leads to Shogo, who quickly panics upon seeing our hero there. Still, the protagonist is not close enough to eliminate him with his small body, so he just shouts for his sword to become longer, and with a precise strike, the tamer is defeated with his sword on the ground. Young tries to recover, because everything will be over if he passes out. Now, because of that, he drinks a vial, remembering his aunt's advice to use this after the technique and before any monster arrives. The boy is determined to deal with this guy, but suddenly his vision goes dark, until a few seconds later, the protagonist wakes up in a completely isolated white place. For a moment, he questions where he is, as well as where the tamer and the monster are. But upon better noticing his situation, the boy realizes that it feels like his body is being torn apart, and suddenly a huge eye appears in the place. A little surprised that he has already reached this point, Guy says that even alone, these things are too dangerous to be consumed by a human, yet they are still in the possession of one. He was hoping that the protagonist wouldn't wake up now, but since that's the case, It thinks for a moment and tells our hero to feed himself, throwing a strange piece of something on the ground anyway. When Young looks at this purple hive, he realizes it might be the purple luminous stone of clarity, and the eye adds that in fact, it is the hero who will be the food because a new era is coming. So in order not to be devoured by time, this entity advises the human child to become stronger sometime later. Hua is right there when Young opens his eyes back in the real world, and although she gets annoyed at being called by her name, despite being older, the girl asks how the hero is feeling at this moment. The protagonist's body is a mess, but it's clear that the amount of mana has increased significantly. Because of that, he gets curious to know if he really consumed the purple, luminous stone of clarity. With a frightening calmness, reports that he has broken mana paths, a twisted intestine, and several bone fractures anyway. The purple, luminous stone of clarity was something all was supposed to take. And for taking that miraculous medicine for himself, the hero feels a bit guilty. Getting straight to the point, the protagonist asks what the girl is doing there. But at that moment, Young's older brother appears looking very worried. He quickly asks to heal the younger one and says that he brought some potions. So Young states that just a potion will be enough. Thus the hero drinks the potions. But the brother is bothered by something and asks Squad to give him a moment alone with the younger one. Mayan Young states that if the boy had died, he would have annihilated the tamer and the entire organization involved, continuing for a martial artist. What the hero did was something grand. But as his brother, he can't see it in a positive light. In this case, apologizes, explaining that he wasn't expecting the appearance of the turtle-headed mountain, and the fact that the hero, at least, knows the difference between arrogance and confidence, relieves the older brother. Changing the subject since he dealt with the tamer, Young asks if he has the right to his information. For some reason, this was already a question Myung Young was expecting. Tamer was revealed to be a rank 5 sorcerer who experimented with Onmyo Do and was expelled when he tried to get his hands on forbidden sorcery. He activated an advanced sorcery when the Guardian was sleeping to try to eliminate Young, using the monster given that. The hero asks if his brother hasn't discovered who is behind this, but to his surprise, it will be difficult at the moment. Young, for his part, comments that he is not the target. So Myung Young asks the reason for that. The protagonist believes that their goal is to damage the brother's reputation by accusing him of not being able to detect the invaders in time, which, although unexpected, the clan heir agrees with, showing some concern about it. But even though it might stain his image a bit, he assures the younger one that it won't make much difference. And since he can't leave his position empty for too long, Myung Jun decides to return. Before that, the protagonist holds the older brother's hand to ask why they don't go along with this. Very intelligently, the hero suggests that Mayan Young lie, that he predicted the tamer's invasion, because Yang could testify in his favor. Mayan Young, for his part, knows that something like this would take the credit away from the child, but Yang prefers it this way to avoid suspicion. So since this deal can benefit both, the brother asks what the hero wants in return. And right away he asks for permission to enter the libraries, saying that 3 days will be enough. Thus the two shake hands and Young refuses thanks, since they are helping each other. Mayan Young admitted that he knew the protagonist would get out of this without his help. Then suddenly the Blue Sword Squad contacted him on his phone, making the brother hurry, but before leaving, Mayan Young remembered to return the dagger to the protagonist, and even knowing what it was, he assured that he would keep the secret. Was surprised Young with his brother's cleverness. A few seconds later, Hua returns commenting that the conversation must have gone well. Being direct, the girl asks which test Young will take, and the boy answers with the same question. Then she yells that she asked first, but the hero doesn't want to say it alone. In this case, with great pride, the girl announces that she will go for the hardest one, and as for the protagonist, he intends to go to the fighting hall. Hua, for her part, didn't even know that such a test existed. The hero revealed it was because it was located on the outskirts. The girl makes it clear how disappointed she is, because even at the end of the test, Young insists on facing easy challenges. However, this idea that the difficulty depends on the location on the island was just a prejudice. But knowing that Hua has the wrong perception of things, the hero doesn't care to change it. Sometime later, although he doesn't remember well, he feels like he is somewhere around there. Yao is searching for the hidden cave, for the second task of the naming ceremony. And after some time wandering through the dense forest, the fighting hall is found. Since the place is quite dark, the protagonist lights a torch. At first glance, the walls seem normal, but Yum knows they are not. Precisely because of that, he draws his sword and cuts the false wall, revealing the iron gates of the entrance to the place he is looking for. After the joy of finding the entrance passes, the hero makes a small cut on his hand to imbue mana into his own blood. Then he throws a few drops onto the gate, and as soon as they come into contact with the metal, the doors open, revealing the inside of the fighting hall. The opening of the gate blows a lot of dust away, and without wasting time, Young goes to what appears to be an altar. Thus, as a descendant of the esteemed Lim martial clan, our hero pours his blood into a vessel, and finding the challenge of the ancestor, he pleads for his request to be accepted. In the fighting hall, there's only one challenge, which is to win a battle against oneself. Young will have an unlimited number of attempts, but even if he chooses to give up, he cannot leave until he wins. Therefore now, it is time to start. But before he can take his first step, something swiftly passes by his neck, and so the protagonist is defeated, with a strike that doesn't even let him realize what happened. Fortunately, a few seconds later, the hero wakes up desperate but alive. It seemed like his head had just been separated from his body. That was an illusion because one cannot die in a fighting hall. Despite that, the illusion was very realistic, which could drive most people who experienced it insane. But that wasn't the problem, because if he was defeated in that way, it means he is capable of doing it. The fighting hall is capable of bringing out 100% of the challengers' potential. This means that the illusion can take advantage of abilities that not even the challenger themselves can, because if they could, they wouldn't have lost anyway. The hero is ready to try once again. After losing again in his third attempt, the boy had his abdomen pierced. On the fifth attempt, he tried fighting barehanded, but was finished with an arm lock. By the 10th, the defeat happened the same way as the first, and thus several attempts passed beyond dozens, until at one moment it seemed there was a balanced dispute between the illusion and the real body. After deflecting an attack, the protagonist retreats finally. In his 80th attempt, the hero believes he has learned everything about himself until now. His greatest strengths are his flexibility and the ability to overcome irregularities, along with the freedom to break expectations. In this case, the protagonist creates an imaginary spirit of fight, and since as a mirror, the illusion does the same as the original body. While the two fight, Yan begins to realize that the more he fights against his copy, the more alike they become. Therefore, at a certain moment, the illusion backs off a bit and switches its spear for a long sword to attack more directly. However, at the moment when the sword pierced the opponent, all the protagonist did was call him stupid, leaving the illusion confused. That's because Yang had lowered his guard on purpose, and now, with all his strength, the cutting demon ability is used, slicing the illusion in half, which before disappearing expresses a proud smile on its face. Passing the fighting hall allows unlocking a hidden skill of the clan, but in the past the skill the hero acquired was the most common, called reinforcement. Because of that, Young wonders if this time he will get a better one. Suddenly, the color of his mana begins to mix from blue to an intense gold, and when everything becomes golden, Young instantly understands which ability it is. Outside the gate of the fighting hall, several people are gathered looking for Yang. Among them is the minister, who already very stressed, questions how many incidents the protagonist will cause in the naming ceremony. However, this stress ends when someone warns that there has been a change in mana density cause. Right after that happened, the gate started to open, and from inside Young began to emerge, but clearly in very bad condition, trying to be as quick as possible. The minister runs to Yang and holds him in his arms as he faints, asking him to wake up then. Still somewhat unconscious, the hero begins trying to ask for something, and Taeyong pays close attention, however, breaking all the expectations created. All that Yang wanted was water and food, therefore, after thinking for a bit about the situation. With the hero almost unconscious in his arms, the minister gets extremely irritated and screams so loudly that he is heard even from outside the mountain. Sometime later, at the young master's mansion, his maid can barely contain all the worry she had been feeling, especially because besides challenging the guardian on the mountain, the Cairo also went to the old fighting hall anyway, even though she had planned to scold him upon his return. Gagwe is very happy that the young master came back, therefore. While wiping her tears, she says she will prepare a bath and food for when he finishes. Changing the subject, the protagonist asks the nanny where his aunt is, but regarding that, Gagwa says she needs to tell him something. After some time, the hero does manage to find his aunt, who's excited to see him, however. The difference is that now she is imprisoned, although the aunt doesn't give it much importance. Wanting to know about Yang's mana increase to match, stray from the subject, the hero gets serious and then that explains that she is fine. However, Nam did not expect her to go so far for him, because the reason she is there is that she caused a scene where she'd accuse the elder of being guilty right in front of her older brother to apologize. The girl admits that she cannot hold back her anger. When thinking about people causing problems for Yang, she got angry because she thought about the possibility of never being able to see the protagonist again, and during that time doing nothing. It felt like something was suffocating her. In Young's honest view, the boy still doesn't completely trust her, but noticed that he started treating her as a real part of his family. In this case, the protagonist agrees to give her a chance to prove herself. Young asks her to wait for the right moment, because he will get her out of there. And then the aunt insists that he shouldn't overexert himself. Both with a smile, the hero says that she needs to get out soon, and that he will be back shortly. On that same night, at an airport, a plane lands on the runway, and right at the bottom of the stairs, some family members are waiting, until the person they are waiting for appears. And with Tasha in front, everyone welcomes him. Upon descending, the clan leader apologizes for the delay, but his wife just tells him that a meal is prepared for him, while the eighth wife and the new child also wait by her side. After the incident at the naming ceremony, the hero thought he had become very strong, but he still wasn't capable of knowing the difference between himself and his father. Unexpectedly, Taishan's attention focused on the illegitimate son, and Yang realized that the eyes of the two crossed. Continuing the conversation he was having on the plane, the patriarch says that he doesn't need someone who refuses to fight for the family. However, when looking at Yang, he comments that apparently there is only one son with the desire to defeat him. Naturally, people are confused about who the patriarch is talking about, but our hero understands everything. He believed he had hidden his emotions well, but Taishan was still able to read his mind. Sometime later, in the banquet hall of the esteemed Lee Marshall clan, a party is taking place with many participants. Among them, in the corner of the room, the hero thinks that this banquet is too big for a naming ceremony. Among the invited guests, one is famous for being the youngest leader of a magic tower, and another is the Amio de Chief, who currently holds the position of vice leader. Suddenly, the family butler interrupts these thoughts, politely asking the young master for permission, because the patriarch is looking for Yang. Naturally, the hero is confused, but the butler insists on guiding him. Yang cannot understand why his father wants to speak with him personally, so he hopes is nothing serious. A few moments later, outside the palace, the boy presents himself to the patriarch, but for some reason along with his father is the clan's older brother. In this case, Young starts to think that his plan has been exposed, and Tezhen says the reason for the summons is obvious. The fact is they are there to talk about the naming ceremony, where according to Myong-jun, the boy was ordered to capture an outsider. And regarding this event, the patriarch states that he is sure that Young is behind it, which leaves our hero a little worried. Anyway, the hero admitted the deal he made in exchange for the right to enter the library. So considering Young's involvement in this incident, the patriarchs decided to forgive him for the false reports. However, he made it clear that he wouldn't overlook it a second time, which the protagonist fully understood. For Myeonjong, the patriarch informs that he will give him a proper punishment after he finishes handling this banquet. Thus the first son leaves back to the hall with a smile on his face, and Young hopes his brother will be all right. Back to the subject, excluding the false report. The resolution of the incident was entirely the hero's achievement. So Tatayon maintains his permission to access the library. Furthermore, for discovering the fighting hall. The patriarch also wishes to give a reward. And in this case, Young makes a request for something he really needs. Later, Tashin thanks everyone present for being there to share blessings with the two children. And now, with Young and Huang prepared in the center of the hall, the naming ceremony will proceed. First, the patriarch calls the eighth daughter to step forward, as she was chosen by the sacred sword. It is said that she will always illuminate the path for others, and in hopes of helping on this path of light. The name given to the girl is Su Yen, which makes her more grateful than ever. Finishing the first naming, the patriarch wastes no time calling the second, who is the ninth son, Young. Despite feeling quite different from the steel selection ritual, the hero decides not to overthink it. Thus Tashin judges his son as someone intelligent and strong, but also flexible without yielding to others. Just like a master blacksmith forges masterpieces, Yang has trained himself to reach his potential. That's said for the patriarch. There is no better way to describe Yang than with the name he will now give, than with a snap of his fingers. The name given back to the boy is Chill. In the past, Keshin gave him this name to live life strong as steel. But this time the meaning behind it has changed, making the hero proud therefore. By pounding his chest, the promise is made that he will not stop until he reaches the top of the clan. And with his new name, Li Chiel gives thanks for it. In an isolated cell of the legal department of the esteemed Li Marshall clan, the protagonist Aunt starts to despair until she finally goes insane. The guy that could no longer stand being locked in this cramped place and didn't even get to see her nephew's naming, since he said he would get her out of there. The girl starts screaming, asking where he is until suddenly the phone rings. And when one of the guards checks it, he informs her that she is now free, while she bites the sheets. First of all, the guard warns that even though she's free, they will give her a punishment later. However, Guyana doesn't care and leaves there, kicking the door in sheer happiness. As she runs, suddenly someone asks her to wait a moment, and to the girl's surprise, that person is our protagonist, the very one she was hoping to find. Given that she asks if it was him who freed her, and knowing it was Gianna asks how it was possible. But all the hero does is hand her a paper, saying that his aunt now has a debt to him. On the letter is officially stated that Gianna has been appointed, to her surprise, as an elder to serve as the master of the ninth son. Li Chul then, with a smile, Chul asks his new master to take good care of him from now on. As more time passes, the maid comments that today is the beginning, and the hero agrees, saying that this is the day his beginning starts. So the protagonist, now 13 years old, says goodbye to Gagwa, and when he says beginning, he is referring to the start of his life as a disciple, already dressed and in the right place. People begin commenting on the rumors about the ninth son. During the ceremonies, however, some believe he's just a bastard who got lucky, although others argue there's no such thing as luck with that much progress. Either way, the hero can't stand being called a bastard anymore. At this moment, the attention shifts to the eighth daughter, which just arrived, Li Xiaoyan. Also 13 years old, is praised as someone wise. Unlike the hero, so the protagonist obviously notices this difference in how the classmates react, until Sylvia herself comes over to talk to the boy, since it has been a while. At first a little embarrassed, the girl hopes that Sheil wasn't too bothered by what happened on the island, and to explain, she recalls what she said when she was disappointed with his decision to go to the outskirts. In this case, she will simply ask the girl not to worry too much about it, which made her quite happy. Feeling more relieved, Su Yin admits that she thought the boy was petty, but that indeed irritated him. Leaving that issue aside, the girl comments on the fact that Gianna is now their master, as well as an active member of the library. But the conversation is interrupted by a shout asking for attention, because it is time to take the students to their classes. All the named disciples must maintain the current formation, and this is something that makes several of the youngsters anxious. Heel, in turn, understands the reason they are so nervous, since his cadets trained for 3 years. Class allocation is very important. Each level is divided into 5 different groups, with more talented disciples in higher classes, like Su Yuan who goes straight to Class 1. Then it is the turn of the young Master Li Qi, and upon receiving the letter indicating his class, he gives his thanks, however. Even from a distance, people can tell that the boy seems disappointed. Chill, in turn, already knew this would happen, but didn't expect them to rig things from the very beginning. At the moment, the boy is in Class 5, which is known as the trash heap, where those deemed unimportant are placed, since members of the main family are placed into classes based on the results of the naming ceremony. The elders and Lady Bake may have interfered. However, contrary to what the crowd would think as something bad, Chu saw the situation as something even better, and so he went with the guide to Class 5 without caring too much. Nevertheless, Sylvian's irritated gaze does not stop staring at the hero for even a second as Child heads to Class 5 without complaining. The girl wears an expression of someone holding back from interfering. However, the hero knows that he is fine, and that what is most important lies elsewhere. While walking to the class, complaints from children are common to hear as they are afraid of failing. And since the members of the Marshall clan took all the best spots, Child can sympathize with his classmates. Suddenly a person appears, asking if he is facing the youngest son of the main family. And upon confirming this, he asks to introduce himself. This boy's name is Kim Han, 14 years old, the son of a small family of blacksmiths who work with the Lees. And when introducing himself, he says it's an honor to be in the same class as the young master, which makes Chu ask why. However, Kim didn't have much to say because he was just curious, since the boy was the center of attention. As Chu understands that Kim isn't lying, he lets his guard down a little, and you ask what he thinks about being placed in Class 5. Instead of being sad, Kim comments that it's possible his skills really are at this level. However, the boy accepts this reality only now, because he is determined to improve in the future. Then upon hearing this, a smile opens on our hero's face, and he says that Kim is already approved. Later in the Class 5 dormitory, the disciple Choi, 15 years old, welcomes the newcomers along with 2 other classmates. Moreover, since the newcomers are confused, they are open to answering any questions. One of them in turn comments that it's time for introductions. Then Lee Jong-ho introduces himself as the instructor of Class 5, and since there are new members today, they will skip the regular class to start. With a quick summary given, this Hyo notices that the man hasn't changed at all since his previous life, because in the past he even helped with private lessons. After some time, the summary is given, and now Inha is in charge of taking the reins to teach the material to the newcomers. Inha quickly introduces himself, and isn't shy to say that he repeated twice, this being his second year as class leader, letting the boys choose their seats freely. The guy informs them that they need to elect the class leader to be the squad captain. Aside from the instructors who educate and help them train, class leaders have full authority. Because of this, a newcomer asks how they choose the leader. So Inha explains that they always decide with light duels, followed by a vote without further delay. The former leader asks to begin, and informs that besides the use of mana being prohibited, there will be a break. However, Cheval interrupts this explanation, asking if this is some kind of joke. Faced with this, Inha asks if the young master is dissatisfied with something, and without any shame the hero says he is dissatisfied with everything. Picking up a wooden sword, Chu tells the guy to wake up to reality, and states that if he wants to play school, he should go to a regular one instead of the Marshall clan. Inha in turn believes the boy is being too radical, because there's a more peaceful way to resolve this. However, since Chu believes they won't understand with just words, he sticks the sword into the ground and commands everyone to come at him, one by one, because he's going to face all the students in a duel. After some time, the protagonist is sweating while panting with exhaustion, and in front of him, several students are already defeated. Inha can barely believe that the young master was able to defeat so many people alone. But now Chio calls Troy in his attention for the next cadet to come into the arena. Definitely the former leader starts to admire the hero, and he informs that there's only one left. So pleased with this, The protagonist asks Inha to stop stalling and come fight him. At the same moment, the two clash swords with the force that the repeater can barely withstand. Inha still cannot understand why the hero is going so far, since this is a duel without rewards and a training match for cadets. Furthermore, at the moment, Chil doesn't even have the energy to make a direct attack. Therefore, deep down, Inha only gets more confused when thinking about the reason. In the past, the boy used to be fierce, like Chil wanted to win just as much as him, and thought he had matured by accepting reality. But today, Inha still wanted very much to feel victorious. So the swords of the two crossed once again. However, to his misfortune, the former leader was disarmed by a precise strike at the base of the sword that opened his guard and badly injured his wrist. This made the boy fall to his knees on the ground, while screaming in pain with the battle apparently over. Shu asked the others to take him to the infirmary, but suddenly, the same boy who is on his knees screams that it's not over yet and gets up to attack once more with all the will he has. Since the boy's right hand was broken, now he uses his left hand to attack. And the hero notices that the light in his eyes is different anyway. Chu opens the boy's guard once again and advances for an attack to the stomach that hits him squarely, making Ino practically lose consciousness until he falls defeated on the ground, lying on his back with no more conditions to continue fighting. Thus this time, Chul orders them to take Inha to the infirmary as soon as possible. With this demonstration, the hero tells everyone that he lives every second like an hour, and every hour like a whole year. From the top of the arena, Chul shouts that life only gets easier when you commit. So to protect the things he loves, he will continue fighting for all the defeated students. The question that remains is whether any of them have ever lived life like that. Because for the hero, this is what fighting truly means. Later, the instructor appears to scold Chil, since 4 kids have broken bones and 3 have damaged organs. However, the hero insists that it is necessary to endure injuries like these if they want to survive in the martial clan. Despite that, Jono argues that everyone has their own reality. But Chil questions if he really needs to explain it to the instructor, since even the cadets already understood to not be too harsh. The hero admits that the instructor is a good man, which is something rare within the Lee martial clan. But since those kids are cadets, the protagonist states that Jong Ho must guide them down the right path, even if it means pretending to be a villain. And with nothing more to say, Chul simply tells the instructor to do his job properly. The next day, the protagonist leaves his room with his body still a bit sore, since he clearly overdid it the day before. However, to get a surprise, even though some are showing disdain and anger, Trinity students are not avoiding his gaze, naturally as he passes by the students. Some insults are heard, but one of them simply greets the young master politely. Kim arrives quite early and apologizes for showing such a pitiful side the day before. But since they are all cadets, the hero states that it is natural for them to be weak, changing the subject. Kim asks if he can ask a question, which Chul is open to answering. Then, without thinking twice, the boy asks what he should do to one day become as strong as him, still not considering himself good enough to teach others. The hero simply praises his colleague's instincts. The day before, Kim was able to dodge 3 consecutive feints, so Child advises the boy to use that vision as an advantage, and with a new idea of where he should focus his training. The boy gives his thanks at this moment. Another important person appears, Inha even in a terrible state. Is there a train? And as an excuse, he knew he would be judged as pathetic if he had chosen a rest. Therefore, the boy came, simply because he no longer wanted to hear something like that about himself, which made Chu very proud of this change. A few minutes later, the instructor appears, and with 4 justified absences and 5 unjustified ones, there are 11 in total naturally. Jungle was a little shocked at how exhausted the students are. Even the atmosphere has changed because due to a predator, those who used to be relaxed are now on edge. Normally today, there would be a basic assessment, but seeing their condition, the instructor wanted to change it. However, remembering his conversation with Chil, Jung Ho immediately shouted that they would start the assessment right away. After some more time passes, the basic physical assessment is completed, and now The class leader will act as the supervisor for independent training. This assessment lasted 10 hours. She even made our hero a little tired, but he is aware that he cannot rest. So while Chival steps into the arena, the students comment among themselves about how different the instructor seems. And at the moment when he is ready, the protagonist calls everyone's attention, introducing himself again as the class leader. As they clearly heard from Choi In-ha the day before, the total authority of the leader is reaffirmed, except for direct orders from the instructor. Kaido makes it clear that his training sessions will be tough, with no intention of adapting to the weak. Then the cadet from Division 5, Kimbo, becomes quite irritated with the new rules. Knowing this, the hero states that anyone who doesn't like it can challenge him to a duel at any time for the position of leader. Without further long speeches, the protagonist orders the students to fight with the person next to them, and in the end, only 6 remain, because the others gave up in the middle of the training, understanding that they have trained enough. The hero dismisses the cadets so they can rest, but as soon as he leaves, everyone starts speaking badly about the leader, saying they have no intention of following someone like that, until Kim yells at them to stop complaining. The reality is that the boy is frustrated, because even with the young master being exhausted, no one managed to land a single hit on him. Faced with this, the students went to Ina to remember how good things used to be, but the boy replied ironically that he liked it so much that he repeated it to explain himself. The ex-leader is aware that if he doesn't change for real, he will truly live as a pathetic loser. And Ina knows that even the other students understand what the young master is trying to do. Because of this, the boy decided to try harder once again and told his classmates to stop resisting as well. Sometime later in the library, the hero is asked to transform his mana, so he tries to comply. However, his aunt asks him to stop because for some reason, every time she tries to refine the boy's aura, it collapses. This deeply irritates her, because she never thought these problems would appear. After reaching the 3rd star, during her complaints, the aunt comments that it would be interesting if there were records of how people use mana in the past. Then our hero thinks about the unlimited, although he still cannot access the next part of its memory. In ancient times, everything was shrouded in dark energy, and even the countless beasts feared it. Even the bravest generals of the nations were defeated because of this. Countless heroes sealed it in Mount Manhwa in the north, and the king honored their deeds by granting them lands. Thus, moved by the king's grace, the heroes forged a single sword, and its name was Unlimited. In the end, finding all this information about the Unlimited was a great discovery. Changing the subject, Diana comments that taking the first step toward the 3rd star alone is very impressive. Therefore, the aunt believes that he will soon overcome the current obstacle, since he has practically already mastered the amplification and conversion techniques. Still a bit curious, she will ask what one could do at the 3rd star. Then the aunt warns that the gang key technique, which is based on aura, can be used, although it will take time to master. In any case, she asks how the kata train is going, but the hero says it's normal. In this case, Gyama smiles and says she can help, but doesn't even explain how, because she assures the boy that he will find out soon, if he trusts her in the end. When this happens, the hero confirms the bad feeling he had that day. In today's class, the instructor asks them to fix their uniforms and pay attention, because there will be a special lesson about mana techniques. And from the research division of the martial clan, Elder Gaoyong is introduced, and the applause makes the girl very embarrassed, not wanting to drag things out. The hero's aunt calls the students to start the lesson right away. This makes the protagonist realize that she has really gotten good at teaching. After some time, the boring lecture finally ends, and now comes the fun part, because she's going to teach the improved version of the Iron Line technique to the instructor's surprise. When everyone thought the class was over, Gianna asked them to pay attention because she would demonstrate it only once. He'll ask what is going on, but since members of the direct bloodline always receive full support and training, his aunt clarifies that she found her own way. This makes the protagonist feel very grateful. If the theory is correct, Gianna comments that the power should double, which will be incredible, then getting everyone's attention. Instructor announces that from now on, They will continue the fights using the Elder's technique, as they are asked to find a fighting partner. Someone quickly chooses the young master as their opponent, and being that person Choi, In-ho warns that he won't hold back. But Chul thinks that's great because he won't give him the first move, while the two are fighting. The aunt thinks that her baby is really brutal in combat, and this reminds her of herself when she was younger. Suddenly Gianna hears some people speaking badly about her nephew, even while being discriminated against for being illegitimate. The students comment that he has some kind of different ability that prevents their hard work from catching up to him. Hearing this, the elder appears right in front of the two. Low gossips, and she asks if they were just now speaking badly about her disciple, realizing they were very rude. The two immediately bowed to apologize. However, while they keep apologizing, Gianna questions what they know to say something like that about Chill. At that moment, another person steps in to say that the young master also doesn't know everything. Bosun comments that they work hard, but every time he treated them like they were nothing, which isn't fair since they grew up in different environments. In this case, Guion understands that they really don't know, which leaves them confused. But she believes that maybe it's even better they don't know, because if they saw how different his daily life is from others, they would be ashamed to complain. This makes Bujin even more furious to know what makes the bastard so different. However, instead of continuing to gossip, he decides to see for himself, to draw his own conclusions. Sometime later, at the end of training, Basong goes out to investigate the hero. But when he looks at him, he believes there is no difference, and that despite talking about effort, in the end the boy was simply born better. At this moment, one of the students appears curious. Since the green-haired one spent the whole day following the ninth son, the boy asks if they can walk around the main estate. But since they are cadets, and she doesn't live in the direct bloodline area, Basong says yes. But more importantly, Bojang doesn't want that bastard to control them forever, so he wants to confirm everything today. Already at night, the boy wonders why the hero is still in the research lab, even though it is 9 p.m. The colleagues who came along start getting sleepy, and naturally give up on finding anything out, so the boys leave, practically leaving Bojang alone there till a few moments later. The protagonist comes out of the research lab, with his legs a bit tired, but still full of energy bosom. In turn believes that he can finally go home. But then the boy starts heading into the training field, which is reserved only for the direct bloodline, and shortly after entering, some terrifying noises are heard by those who are spying. The students really can't understand if that was even a sound of training. Therefore, one of them admits that the young master is different, and asks to just stop because deep down, Chul isn't wrong, however. Bojang replies by saying that he has also never neglected his personal training, which creates a bad atmosphere among the three. Now with his last two colleagues leaving, the green-haired one can't stop thinking about what makes him different from the bastard. That's why he wants to prove, no matter the cost, that he's not wrong like the others think, for quite a while longer. Bosom follows the protagonist until he finally enters his house. But at that moment a lantern lights up, the boy asking who's there. Noticing it's a cadet, one of the guards looks a bit confused. The boy explains that the young master walks around at this hour every day, but usually no one else does that. In this case, Biasang said he had something to take care of, but since this was a violation of the rules, the man asked him to return soon and in this way. The boy agreed, but even at 2 in the morning, the lights in Chul's room were still on. Therefore, with nothing more to argue about, Biasang finally accepts to let it go and heads back to the dormitory. The next day, at 5 o'clock in the morning, at the exclusive training field of Class 5, Biasang is awake, but quite weakened from having slept so little the previous night. However, something surprises him, because despite seeming exhausted, 13-year-old Keitel is really managing to live with only 3 or 4 hours of sleep. In contrast, when Bozong goes home, he rests by watching TV or playing games. The boy often trains alone, but still maintains a balance between sleep, rest, entertainment. Noticing that one of the students is in front of him, the hero asks what's going on. Then Bozong asks if the boy isn't tired, which irritates him at the same moment. The hero realizes that the green-haired one was one of those who are following him. Bozong in terms starts throwing all his excuses at once about Chill having support from the direct bloodline. However, the hero replies that he has lived like this since he was younger, and that he only slept a little more before becoming a cadet. Obviously, he is tired from not sleeping enough. So the student asks why he pushes himself so far. Chill approaches to whisper in the boy's ear that he already knows the answer. And so the entire conception, previously established by the young master, falls apart. Sometime later, in the training arena of the martial clan's patriarch, someone catches his attention. The butler informs that the official documents of the orders have already been processed, so Tashin asks for them, however. After reading the summary, it said that it is not enough, even though it involves 7th and 8th class dungeons, since weapons and supplies can be stored but people cannot. What the patriarch wants is to create people who can survive. Then the butler understands. But before leaving, he has another important matter to report. Within a few seconds, the summary of the youngest actions is given, and the patriarch is not surprised, because the hero has always had a different look since childhood, like someone who has already been at rock bottom. But leading and changing people is a completely different matter. Therefore, Tajian asks the butler to change the test content, and since the 8th daughter is involved, the standards should be raised. Thus, the patriarch will personally test whether that child is truly capable of leading others. At the exclusive training field of Class 5, John Woo appears, as usual, to give the lesson. However, upon arriving, the students are already training very competitively. Even though it is the weekend, everyone is already running early in the morning, in an organized manner without even meaning to be called. The moment the students see the instructor, he praises their hard work on the weekend. And if there is any cadet absent, he asks for them to be called because he has an announcement to make. Although it is a bit sudden, it is announced that the semester evaluation will be brought forward. Therefore, it was decided to give a 1-week break before it. So the instructor asked them to enjoy it a lot. However, before he could continue, he realized that he wouldn't need to remind the students to keep training on their own during the break anyway. Trusting his hard-working students, instructor dismisses everyone. Chill, in turn, analyzes this information about the sudden break and the advanced semester evaluation. However, he comments with some strangeness about the fact that no one is leaving the arena. And Kim explains that they are watching the young master. And In-Hat adds that they are looking for guidance about the break. In this case, the hero tells them that the time is theirs and that they can do whatever they want. To everyone's surprise, Keel says they can rest when they need to, and that he won't make them train during the recess. However, instead of being happy, the students gossip and disbelief that such words came from the young master, which leaves him a little annoyed. Thus, Chu asks if they should start like on the first day during the break, and everyone agrees then. Proud of the students, the hero says that resting is also important, and clarifies that he will see them next week. This makes everyone very excited about the young master's planning. Back in the research lab, Jiang is bothered because the hero is disturbing his aunt at work, just when she got a holiday. However, Chu exposes her, saying that when he arrived, she was just watching a weird video on her phone. Jiang in turn insists on defending the video, saying it was about a boy who recovered from leukemia and was recognized by the president. Leaving that weirdness aside, the hero discovered that the reason for moving the evaluation forward was an official order in this case. Chu thinks that the evaluation will be much harder than in the past, and that he needs to access the next memory of the unlimited. However, the fact that he cannot read the next memory means that there is still something he must do first. So the protagonist has no choice but to think a little more about it. Suddenly, he bumps into some papers, causing them all to fall off the sofa, which makes his aunt very irritated as she tries to stay organized. However, among the papers, one catches his attention. In it, the difference between ancient and modern martial arts is the purpose, and there is speculation that ancient techniques were focused on combat against beasts. Thinking about this purpose, Chu believes that the slashing demon is like this, because the original is composed of several forms. Thus he quickly stands up, which leaves his aunt a little confused. But instead of explaining, the hero just says that he needs to run to the training field right now. and the wind that rises only messes up the papers even more, leaving Guyana completely furious. Sometime later, at the training center, the protagonist summons the Unlimited and tries to imagine a target with his eyes closed. This enemy must be bigger than him and a non-humanoid beast. There must be a gigantic monster. And the technique needs to ignore all its attributes, because those that are just flashy, without destructive power, are useless. In the end, the clear purpose of a slashing demon is nothing more, nothing less than to kill monsters. So try to replicate the scene he saw in the dream. The protagonist jumps on top of the apocalypse-level monster and uses the slashing demon ability. With all the strength, he has to cut the beast in half. Back in reality, an immense amount of dust rises, and with the Unlimited in hand, the hero realizes that he succeeded. Therefore, now Chill wonders what memory the sword will show him this time, and without even needing to wait long, the protagonist is teleported to a different reality. He doesn't know where he is, but believes it's a training field, just like when he first acquired the Unlimited. However, the fact that his perspective only changes when reading the sword's memories is still unexplained suddenly. In this place, the same warrior he saw in the memories fighting the monster appears, and his speed is insane. However, something is even more impactful, because every time the weapon changes, the aura also modifies instead of him entering the aura. The Unlimited itself plays the role of altering it. At that moment, another person appears, asking if the warrior has changed his approach again. Faced with this, the swordsman simply asks to stop being spied on, but the man continues to ask if these techniques have already been named. In response, the warrior explains that he doesn't even consider these real techniques. Then the man suggests that they be called 10,000 changes, and the swordsman accepts the suggestion. Changing the subject, the swordsman asks if his colleague brought someone there, but the guy denies it, and quickly attacks the warrior with his own sword, because he came there precisely to have a good fight, while spying on everything. The hero is shocked when he notices something, because the color of the eyes and the color of the hair are clear signs that this warrior belongs to the direct bloodline of the esteemed Lee Marshall clan somewhere near a wall. A van drives along a dirt road, and from inside it, the protagonist thinks that this scenario is not all different from the past or the future. A barrier separating safe zones from danger zones is already something common. A long time ago, a huge rift appeared near the Pacific Ocean called the Blue Hole. This was an unknown space that had not yet been properly explored, and from there unknown monsters came out, dominating the places they passed through. Humanity fought against these monsters for a long time, trying to reclaim their territories. However, even today, there are still unrecovered zones, and these areas are known as unexplored zones or danger zones. So nowadays, they say that these barriers divide safe zones from danger zones. Kim, who is in the same vehicle, comments that the closer they get to these zones, the more desolate the scenery becomes. But since they are still inside the barrier, the hero comments that it doesn't get worse than this, because what changes is just the local urban development. And Chio can say this with confidence, because he has already lived for a long time in a village, in a place like this anyway. The person responsible for the excursion warns that the children must remain on high alert. That's because the place they are about to enter is a truly unexplored dungeon. In the danger zone, with everyone outside the vehicle, the instructor asks them to gather, because they will set up camp and check the necessary supplies before starting the test. From now on, it is said that the children will have to handle everything, but the instructor is not worried. As a teacher, he will provide the maximum support he can and give all the assistance possible. So he asks them to show everything they've learned so far, and all the children cheer. Chill in turn announces that from now on he will take the lead. But before that, he makes one thing clear. The hero informs them that this test became harder because of him, and if anyone wants to leave, this is the last chance clearly. This semester evaluation was not designed for cadets, because they are in the forest of the human face queens. Since the entire dungeon is covered in webs, it means it's dangerous, and the mission is to capture footage of an adult spider. However, the students comment that no matter how much he tries to test them, it won't work, Inna says that none of the cadets from Class 5 will run away anymore, which Kim agrees with, and finally, even Bozong states with a serious expression that he believes in the young master, which naturally makes all that worry disappear. In any case, she will also doesn't forget to comment on how embarrassing that statement was. Back to business. Our hero asks them to check communications and supplies so they can enter a forest inhabited by human face spiders, is what they will face. Human face spiders have behavior patterns similar to ants and bees, making them difficult to deal with. Therefore, Chul explains that the mission is to record the movements of spiders that are at least 10 years old, using the video equipment. However, from now on, the hero leaves Inha in charge of the group, to the boys' surprise. That's because the protagonist will move alone from this point on to become the prey of the human face spiders, which after thinking for a minute, obviously made all the students scream to contest the decision. Sometime later in this forest infested with monsters, one of the spiders is defeated by the protagonist's sword. Then already a bit tired, he realizes that they have finally gathered. For the hero, it was worth killing them on purpose to spread the danger hormone, since they take more nutritious prey back to the nest to feed their larvae, and at the moment, the simplest way to be considered valuable prey is by proving that the prey itself also possesses great power. Therefore, she will simply draw as is unlimited and transforming it into a spear. Uses the slashing demon to destroy the largest one. So when the first large one is defeated, an endless horde of others appears to overwhelm the prey. However, that was exactly where our hero was seeking until now. Sometime later, Chu wakes up in a different place. It seems he is inside the cocoon of a human face spider. And if that's the case, the plan is going as expected. The poison is already making the boy's stomach heavy, but his condition isn't bad. Therefore, he first suppresses his presence with the stealth technique, and then cuts all the webs with the unlimited. Since this is the nest, Chu thinks that the larvae must be gathered somewhere. However, suddenly, as he moves further, the boy notices something shocking in front of him. In this place, there are countless prey cocoons, definitely more than a daily hunt could gather for the hero. It doesn't make sense that they haven't consumed them yet. But another revelation clarifies everything, because right in the middle of them is a cocoon, totally different from the others, which is attracting the spiders and vibrating with a dark energy. Faced with this, Shu quickly realizes that his own dark energy is resonating with that thing, until suddenly the cocoon breaks its own walls, and from inside begins to emerge an unimaginable monster. Then with a devilish laugh, the rank 5 monster called Queen of the Human Face Spiders appears. Heddle cannot believe that a monster from a rank 6 dungeon can speak, but then corrects himself when he realizes that it didn't open its mouth. So the only option left is that the dark energy is reading the monster's consciousness. Without wasting time, the queen pierces the first cocoon to feed, and having to move away, the hero falters in the stealth technique. Therefore, the monster manages to sense the presence of the child inside its nest. But after realizing that the thing that woke her up is inside him, all the queen does is scream for the protagonist to give it to her. That scream is the pressure that only high-ranking predators can emit. But since a predator's pressure doesn't work on the protagonist, the queen feels offended by the child's resistance. Moreover, the attack had the opposite effect because it was reflected, breaking the ceiling formation. So already extremely furious, the queen simply decides to blow everything up at once.